It all started on a quiet Wednesday morning. The sun had barely risen, casting a soft, golden light over my neighborhood. I was sipping my coffee, ready to start the day when I noticed something odd happening outside. Karen, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, was at it again. But this time, she wasn't just bossing people around. She was doing something far worse. I saw her walk up to my neighbor's porch, a package in hand. I assumed it was hers, but then I saw her do something completely outrageous. She tossed the package into the bushes. Confused, I ran outside to see what was going on. As I approached, I could hear Karen muttering to herself, something about too many packages and unwanted junk. But this wasn't just any package. There was a letter addressed to a local war veteran, Mr. Thompson, who lived just a few doors down. He'd recently received some recognition for his service, and that mail contained important documents regarding a benefits claim. I felt a knot form my stomach. Was she really doing this? I didn't want to believe it. I had known Karen for years, and while she had always been a bit too involved in everyone's business, I had never seen her act this out of line. Was she seriously throwing out someone else's mail? Especially of veterans? The thought was almost too outrageous to comprehend. I had to act fast. I ran over to the bushes where Karen had tossed the package. It wasn't hard to find. It was sticking out from behind the bushes like a neglected child. As I picked it up, I realized just how serious this was. The envelope was marked with the official seals of the Veterans Affairs Office. I felt a surge of anger rising within me. This wasn't just any random piece of junk mail. This was Mr. Thompson's livelihood, his benefits, something he had fought for and earned. I turned to look at Karen, who was standing there with an expression that could only be described as smug. She must have thought she was doing everyone a favor by getting rid of unwanted junk. But how could she be so blind to the gravity of her actions? She had no idea what she had just thrown away. I walked toward her, holding up the package. "Karen, what the hell do you think you're doing?" I asked, my voice trembling with both disbelief and frustration. She blinked at me, unfazed. "What? I'm just cleaning up. This is all garbage. Too many packages in this neighborhood, it's becoming a mess." I felt my blood boil. You don't get to decide what's junk and what's not. This belongs to Mr. Thompson. This is a letter regarding his benefits as a veteran. You have no right to touch it. Her eyes narrowed. Well, it was sitting out there for too long. It was just sitting there, so I thought I'd save everyone the trouble. She waved dismissively, as if I were making a bigger deal out of nothing. It's not like anyone's going to miss it. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This wasn't just an innocent mistake. This was an intentional act of disrespect. I felt my hands shaking, and my mind raced for a solution. I needed to get this package to Mr. Thompson, and I needed to make sure Karen understood how serious this was. Without saying another word, I turned and ran to Mr. Thompson's house. My heart was pounding in my chest. He was a retired war veteran, someone who had served his country with honor. How could anyone, especially someone like Karen, treat his mail, his rights, with such disregard? I knocked on his door, and after a moment he answered. His face lit up when he saw me. "Oh, hey there. I wasn't expecting anyone today." "Mr. Thompson," I said, holding out the package, "this belongs to you. I'm really sorry, but I caught Karen throwing it out. It's important. It's about your benefits claim." His face instantly turned serious. He took the package from my hands and held it for a moment, his fingers trembling slightly. "I've been waiting for this," he muttered under his breath, almost to himself. "I've been waiting for this for weeks. This is about my pension, and she tossed it away?" I nodded, feeling sick to my stomach. "Yeah. She said it was just junk. Like your mail doesn't matter." Mr. Thompson's eyes were full of disbelief and hurt. "I served this country for decades," he said, shaking his head. "And someone thinks my mail isn't worth keeping safe? I can't believe this." He took the letter into his hands, carefully opening it. I could tell by the look on his face that this wasn't just a letter, it was a lifeline. This document could determine whether or not he would be able to get the help he needed. To think that Karen, in her arrogance, had decided to play God with someone's future, it was infuriating. I knew I had to do something more. This wasn't just about one package. It was about the principle of respect and about holding people like Karen accountable for their actions. If she could get away with this, what would be next? What if this happened to someone else who didn't have a neighbor like me who wouldn't stand up to her? I immediately called the police. I knew the law was clear on this. Tampering with someone's mail, especially a veteran's, was a serious crime. As I waited for the authorities to arrive, I couldn't help but think how much this small act of negligence had impacted Mr. Thompson's life. I never imagined that a simple walk outside would end up triggering such an intense situation. But in that moment, it became clear to me that some things simply can't be ignored. Respect and decency should always come first, especially when dealing with someone who has sacrificed so much for our country. I couldn't let it slide. I walked over to her, trying to remain calm despite the anger bubbling inside me. "Karen, what are you doing with Mr. Thompson's mail?" I asked, my voice shaking with disbelief. She turned to me with a smirk. "It's just junk," she said dismissively. "People like him don't need all this mail clogging up the place." I was speechless. It was one thing to mess with someone's property, but throwing away important mail? Especially for a war veteran who'd fought for our country? That was crossing a line I couldn't ignore. Without wasting another second, I grabbed the package from the bushes and sprinted over to Mr. Thompson's house. My mind raced as I thought about the enormity of what had just happened. It wasn't just a minor error or mistake. Karen had made an intentional decision to throw away mail that was of great significance to Mr. Thompson. As I rushed through the streets, I couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation. How could someone be so ignorant? Didn't she understand the value of the things she was tossing aside? When I knocked on his door, I was relieved when Mr. Thompson opened it. He was a bit surprised to see me, but his face softened when he saw the package in my hand. "Good to see you," he said warmly, though his eyes seemed tired. He had always been kind, even though he'd been through so much in his life. His posture was a little slumped, but there was a dignified strength about him. He'd served our country in ways most people would never understand. I could see the concern in his face as I handed him the letter. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Thompson," I said, feeling a mix of guilt and anger. I saw Karen throw this out. She said it was junk." His face immediately grew serious. His hand trembled slightly as he took the letter from my hands. "I've been expecting that letter," he said, his voice trembling. "It's about my pension benefits, and she just threw it out?" I nodded, feeling a heavy pit in my stomach. "Yes, she did. I couldn't just let that slide." He stared at the envelope for a moment, as if processing the gravity of what had just happened. "You don't understand," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "This is not just a letter. This is about everything I've worked for, everything I've earned." I was speechless. In that moment, it hit me just how personal this was. For a man who had dedicated his life to serving our country, his pension benefits meant much more than money. They were a small token of appreciation for his years of sacrifice, for everything he had given up. To have that thrown out like it was nothing, it was more than just disrespectful. It was cruel. "I'm sorry, Mr. Thompson," I said again, my heart aching. "I'll make sure this doesn't happen again." He sighed, his shoulders slumping a bit more as he slowly sat down. "I never thought something like this would happen," he said quietly. "You'd think people would have more respect for veterans, for people who've given so much." I felt my fists clench at the injustice of it all. Karen had no idea what she had done. And now I had to figure out what to do next. "I'm going to make sure she understands how serious this is," I said, my voice hardening. "She can't get away with this." Mr. Thompson looked at me, his eyes tired but grateful. "Thank you," he said. "You don't have to, but I'm grateful." But I couldn't just let it go. What if this wasn't an isolated incident? What if Karen was pulling this kind of stunt with other neighbors, throwing out things that didn't fit her narrow view of what was important? What if there were more veterans, more people in need, whose mail was getting tossed aside like garbage? I needed to make sure this wouldn't happen again, not just for Mr. Thompson, but for everyone in the neighborhood. I knew that Karen thought she had the upper hand. She thought she could control everything, from the way the lawns looked to who received what mail. But I was done standing by and letting her get away with this. I made up my mind. I would go to the police. This wasn't just a case of neighborhood drama anymore. This was a crime. Tampering with someone's mail was not only disrespectful, it was illegal, and I wasn't going to sit back and let her get away with it. I didn't waste any time. I grabbed my phone and called the local police department, explaining what had happened. The dispatcher listened intently, and I could tell they understood the seriousness of the situation. "We'll send someone over," she said. "Mail tampering is a federal offense." As I hung up the phone, I couldn't help but feel a rush of both relief and nervousness. I wasn't sure what would happen next, but I knew that taking action was the right thing to do. I couldn't let Karen or anyone like her think they could walk all over people, especially those who had given everything for our country. The cops arrived within the hour. I explained the situation, showed them the package, and told them about Karen's behavior. The officers took my statement and went to Karen's house. The longer they were gone, the more I started to wonder what she would say. Would she try to deny it? Would she continue to act like she was above the law? I didn't have to wait long for the answer. Moments later, the officers returned, and they had brought Karen with them. Her face was pale, and she looked completely defeated as they read her rights. It was clear Karen had underestimated the consequences of her actions. Standing there, watching Karen be led away in handcuffs, I felt a sense of justice wash over me. It wasn't just about this one incident. It was about standing up for what's right and making sure that people who thought they could bully others were held accountable. That's when I made up my mind. I wasn't going to let Karen get away with this, especially not when it involved someone who had served our country. I immediately called the police, explaining the situation. The dispatcher assured me they would send someone to investigate. As I hung up, I felt a mix of relief and dread. Part of me was worried that Karen would get away with it. After all, she had some connections in the neighborhood. Karen was the self-appointed enforcer of the HOA rules, and she often wielded that power like a weapon. Over the years, she had made it clear that she believed she was above everyone else, including the law. I feared that if this wasn't handled properly, she'd find a way to wiggle out of any consequences. But another part of me knew that this was bigger than just a neighborhood squabble. This was about standing up for what's right. What Karen had done wasn't a small mistake. Throwing out someone's mail, especially a veteran's, wasn't just an act of disrespect. It was a violation of trust and a violation of the law. I couldn't let that slide. Not for Mr. Thompson, not for any of us. The minutes seemed to drag on as I stood there, watching Mr. Thompson, who was still in shock over the whole ordeal. I could see how it weighed on him. For someone who had served this country, giving so much, only to have his mail treated like garbage, it was heartbreaking. I wanted to make sure that he knew I would stand by him through this, and that what Karen had done was not just an offense to him, but to all of us who respected the sacrifices veterans made. Within an hour, the police arrived. 2 officers, a man and a woman, stepped out of the squad car and made their way toward me. The moment they approached, I could feel the shift in the air. The seriousness of the situation was finally settling in. They took my statement, and I showed them the package I had retrieved from the bushes. The officer who had been taking notes looked up at me. "This is a federal offense," he said, a hint of disbelief in his voice. "Tampering with someone's mail, especially something as important as this, is serious." I nodded. "I know. That's why I called. Mr. Thompson is a war veteran, and this letter was about his pension. She had no right to touch it." The female officer, who had been listening quietly, looked toward the street. "We'll go speak with Karen," she said firmly. "You did the right thing. You're a good neighbor." I could tell they were taking this seriously. They didn't make light of the situation, and they certainly didn't downplay what Karen had done. As they walked toward Karen's house, I stood there, waiting, my mind racing with thoughts of what was about to unfold. Was Karen going to deny everything? Would she try to talk her way out of it? Part of me was terrified that she might use her connections to get away with it, but part of me knew that what she did was too big to ignore. It wasn't long before the officers knocked on Karen's door. At first, she didn't answer, and I could hear her voice from inside, raised in frustration. She was arguing with the officers through the door, but they persisted. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Karen opened the door. Her face was flushed with anger, her posture defensive. As the officers explained the situation, her expression shifted from irritation to full-blown defiance. "I don't know what you're talking about," Karen said, her voice cold and dismissive. "I didn't touch anyone's mail. I don't even know who that person is." The officers didn't let her off the hook. "Ma'am, We have a witness who saw you take the package and throw it into the bushes. Not only is this a violation of HOA rules, but it's also a crime. You've interfered with federal mail, which carries serious penalties." Karen scoffed, her arms crossed tightly across her chest. "This is ridiculous. I was just cleaning up the neighborhood. You really think I'm going to get arrested for throwing out some junk mail?" The officers were firm. "You're interfering with someone's right to receive their mail, and this isn't something we can just let slide. You need to come with us." Karen's expression faltered, and she took a step back, clearly shocked that the officers weren't backing down. She tried to argue further, but they were not having any of it. I could see them start to reach for their handcuffs. That's when I heard her mutter something under her breath, but it was too late for apologies. Her time had run out. I watched from a distance as Karen's defiance slowly crumbled. Her head lowered in surrender, and the officers stepped forward. In what felt like an instant, they placed her in handcuffs, and she was led to the squad car. For a moment, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Karen, the self-appointed enforcer of neighborhood rules, the woman who had tormented so many with her petty complaints and overreaching authority, was now the one in trouble with the law. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me, and I couldn't help but feel a small sense of satisfaction. I turned to Mr. Thompson, who had been quietly watching the whole scene unfold. His eyes were filled with a mix of disbelief and relief. He nodded slowly, his lips trembling. "Thank you," he whispered. "I never expected something like this to happen, but I'm glad you were there to help." The officers finished their paperwork and, after giving me one last nod, walked back to their car, leaving Karen standing there, still in handcuffs. I couldn't help but feel that in some strange way the neighborhood would never be the same after today. Karen had gone from being the queen of the HOA to a criminal. The power she once held had vanished, and the rest of us were left with the knowledge that no one, no matter how powerful they thought they were, could escape the consequences of their actions forever. Karen didn't take kindly to the officer's visit. I could hear her voice rising from her front porch as she argued with them. "I didn't do anything wrong," she shouted, her voice growing louder. "It's just a letter. Why are you making such a big deal out of this?" Her tone was defensive, full of that familiar arrogance that had made her the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood. She was used to pushing people around, getting her way with her loud mouth and domineering attitude. I could hear the defiance in her voice as she tried to talk her way out of the situation, convinced that she could talk herself out of anything. But the officers were firm. They weren't interested in her excuses. They knew what they were dealing with. "Ma'am, tampering with someone's mail is a federal offense," one of the officers said, his voice calm but resolute. "What you did wasn't just rude, it was illegal." Karen's expression faltered, but she quickly regained her composure. She crossed her arms over her chest, her posture rigid with frustration. "It's just a letter. It wasn't anything important. You're overreacting." The officer's gaze didn't waver. "You interfere with the delivery of federal mail, and that's not something we can just let slide. You're under arrest for mail tampering." At that, Karen's entire demeanor changed. Her face, which had been flushed with anger and frustration, turned white. Her eyes widened, and she took a step back as if trying to physically distance herself from the reality of what was happening. The shock seemed to hit her all at once. For a brief moment, she was completely silent, as if trying to process the enormity of the situation. She had always believed she was above the rules, always thought she could get away with everything, but now the law was telling her she had crossed a line that couldn't be ignored. "I didn't know," she suddenly blurted out, her voice high-pitched with panic. "I thought it was just junk. I didn't mean to do anything wrong. I was just trying to keep things clean. It was sitting there forever, and I thought—" Her words trailed off as she realized they weren't going to let her off the hook. The officers didn't respond to her pleas. It was too late for excuses now. Karen had crossed a line, and her actions were far beyond something that could be explained away. She had no idea that throwing away someone's mail, particularly a veteran's, was not only disrespectful, but also a federal crime. The male officer looked at her sternly, then nodded to his partner, who stepped forward and placed the handcuffs on her wrists. Karen's defiance crumbled in the face of the law. For the first time, she was powerless, and the realization hit her hard. She was going to be held accountable for her actions. I could almost see her world collapsing around her as the officers led her to the squad car. I stood frozen, watching in disbelief. The woman who had terrorized the neighborhood with her overbearing demands, the woman who thought she could control everyone's lives with a few rules, was now the one being arrested. It felt almost surreal. Karen, who had once made me feel small and insignificant with her arrogant demeanor, was now being handcuffed like a criminal. As the officers read her rights to her, Karen's expression shifted. There was no longer any defiance in her eyes, only confusion and fear. For the first time, she seemed to understand the consequences of what she had done. She had always thought she was in control, but now she was on the receiving end of the law's authority. The female officer turned to me, giving me a brief but appreciative nod before turning back to Karen. "You'll have your day in court, Karen," she said firmly. "But for now, you need to come with us." Karen's lips parted as if she was about to argue again, but the words didn't come. She was speechless, her defiance gone. The officers led her to the squad car, where they helped her into the back seat. I could hear her muttering under her breath, but it was too late for anything to change now. As the car door slammed shut, I felt a strange sense of justice wash over me. The neighborhood that had long been under Karen's thumb was now free from her control, at least for the time being. I had always known that Karen's sense of power was built on manipulation and intimidation, but today she had learned that the law couldn't be manipulated. I turned to look at Mr. Thompson, who had been watching the entire scene unfold. His face was a mixture of shock and disbelief, but there was also a hint of relief in his expression. He had been the one most affected by Karen's actions, and seeing her arrested was the closure he needed. "I never thought I'd see the day," he said quietly, shaking his head. "She always acted like she could do whatever she wanted. I never thought anyone would stand up to her." I nodded. "No one else was going to. But you deserve better than to have your mail thrown out like that." Mr. Thompson smiled faintly. "Thanks for looking out for me. I guess that's what neighbors are for, huh?" "Yeah," I said, my voice softening. "We look out for each other." With Karen now on her way to face the consequences, the neighborhood began to feel different. The tension that had hung in the air for so long seemed to lift. For the first time in a long while, people were no longer afraid to speak up, to take action when something wasn't right. Karen had learned the hard way that no one, no matter how much power they thought they had, could escape the reach of the law. As the squad car drove away, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. Karen's reign of terror was over, and it had been replaced by a new sense of justice, a reminder that sometimes standing up for what's right meant making sure people like Karen faced the consequences of their actions. The arrest sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. People who had been quietly watching from their windows now gathered in groups, whispering about what had happened. The once calm, suburban streets were now buzzing with gossip. "Did you hear about Karen?" one neighbor would ask, their voice low, as if still in disbelief. "She's in jail for throwing out someone's mail." No one could believe it. Karen, the self-proclaimed HOA enforcer, the woman who'd always seemed untouchable, was now the one being carted off to jail in handcuffs. It was the kind of thing that people would talk about for months, maybe even years, long after Karen had slunk back into her hole of quiet shame. As for me, I couldn't help but feel a sense of justice. Watching Karen being led away, her pride shattered, felt like a moment of reckoning for all the people she had ever tried to intimidate, including me. It felt good knowing that the law was on the side of the people who had been wronged, not the self-righteous people like Karen who thought they could act with impunity. Her sense of entitlement had finally caught up with her, and she was no longer in control. For the first time, the balance of power had shifted in the neighborhood. For years, Karen had used her position as the HOA enforcer to control and manipulate the people around her. She had issued countless fines for the smallest infractions, made unreasonable demands, and always made sure that everyone knew she was in charge. She was the one who decided what was acceptable in the neighborhood, who was worthy of staying and who wasn't. And for years, most of us kept our heads down, afraid of the consequences of standing up to her. But now, Karen was the one facing consequences. It was a bittersweet moment of victory for the rest of us. As for Mr. Thompson, he was deeply grateful, though still in shock. The whole ordeal had shaken him more than I think he let on. "I never thought something like this could happen," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "To think she'd throw out my mail. I'm just glad you were there to help." He paused for a moment, looking down at the package in his hands, the very one Karen had tossed away like it meant nothing. His face softened, and I could see how much it meant to him that someone had stood up for him when it mattered most. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't stepped in, Mr. Thompson continued. People like her. They think they can do whatever they want, just because they're in charge of something small like the HOA. But no one should have that power. Not like that. I nodded, feeling a sense of pride, but also a little bit of sadness. This wasn't just about Mail. This wasn't just about Karen's overreach as an HOA member. This was about a man who had fought for this country, who had sacrificed so much, being disrespected in such a personal and hurtful way. I couldn't let that stand. I was just glad I could do something about it. A lesson learned the days that followed were filled with rumors, gossip, and a lot of disbelief from the neighbors. The story quickly spread through the community, and everyone had their own take on what had happened. Some neighbors were shocked. Others were quietly amused by the drama, but one thing was clear. Karen's reputation was in tatters. The woman who had once been feared and respected for her self-appointed role as HOA enforcer was now the object of mockery. People began to question her every move. What other rules had she been enforcing out of spite? How many times had she gone too far before? Karen was eventually released from jail after a brief stay, but the damage to her reputation was done. The once powerful HOA queen was no longer the authority figure she had once been. She had gone from being the one who made the rules to the one who had to live with the consequences of breaking them. And as I watched her walk down the street a few days later, I saw it in her eyes, a flicker of shame, followed quickly by a deep desire to avoid everyone's gaze. People who had once been afraid of her now ignored her. Some even muttered under their breath as she walked by, giving her the cold shoulder. She had crossed a line, and everyone in the neighborhood knew it. Karen began to fade into the background, her power slipping away with every passing day. The once feared woman who had tried to control the lives of everyone around her was now an afterthought. She no longer had the respect of neighbors, and her attempts at reasserting authority were met with indifference. No one wanted to hear about her new rules or her ideas for improving the neighborhood. The community had grown weary of her, and it seemed that the more she tried to fight back, the less anyone was willing to listen. As for me, I continued to look out for Mr. Thompson and anyone else who might need help. He had become a good friend over the weeks that followed the incident, and I wasn't going to let Karen's actions go unnoticed. I started checking in on Mr. Thompson more often, making sure he had everything he needed. It felt good to help someone who had been wronged, and I knew that standing up for what was right wasn't just a one-time thing. Every time I saw Karen walking down the street, she would quickly turn her head, avoiding eye contact. She knew she had crossed a line, and everyone in the neighborhood knew it too. The power she once held over us was gone, replaced by the truth that no one is above the law. Not even the self-righteous Karen who thought she could get away with anything. In the end, the story became a cautionary tale for everyone who thought they could control others with impunity. It was a reminder that actions have consequences, no matter who you are, how much power you think you have. The law had shown up, and so had the truth. Mail tampering may have seemed like a small act at the time, but it was a reminder that no one, not even the most entitled, could escape accountability. No one was above the law. And for all of us in the neighborhood, that was a lesson well learned.